Hi, this is David Oaf with Preferred Utilities. In this video, we're going to show you how to zero and span the servos in a BMU system. So this is done both at the BMU LCD and at the individual servo. And this video assumes that you've set the travel limit switches in the servo, you've set the address of each servo, and you've done the configure servo routine where you've told the BMU what the function is of each servo. And if you missed that, we have videos on all 4 of those functions on YouTube as well. So the first step in zero and spanning the servos is at the LCD, I hit the up and the down button to go to the main menu, and then I arrow down till I get to servos, and now I'm going to arrow down till I get to zero calibration. And now the BMU knows what each of its servos does, so in this function it refers to them by name, and we're going to do the gas valve servo first. So I arrow down to put the cursor on disabled, and the BMU is trying to tell us what to do. If you watch that little scrolling crawler thing on the bottom of the screen, it's telling us that servo 0 needs 0 cal, and I'm going to follow the instructions on this screen. So I arrow down to disabled, put the cursor on disabled and press enter. That changes it to enable. And in this demo that I have set up, servo 0 is my gas valve, and that's here on the far left. And now that I'm in zero config mode, I can use the clockwise and counterclockwise buttons here to actually move the servo. So the servo's in manual. So I can run the servo clockwise, counterclockwise, and I want to put it down to the 0 position. And you know, here in my home office, I can hear the servo moving, and I can hear the limit switch click when it makes. In a boiler room, you're not going to be able to hear all this. So what you can do is you can watch that little 1-digit red LED display, and it will tell you when the servo quits moving. So this servo is going to be clockwise to close. So I've run it all the way clockwise until it stops. And now this part's a little tricky. I'm gonna hold down the 0 button, I'm gonna push the clockwise button, and I'm gonna let go. And that does 2 things. That tells the BMU that clockwise is low fire on this servo, and it tells it that at this position on the feedback pot, this is low fire. So we know that it took it because now the crawler at the bottom of the LCD screen says that servo 0 needs seek limits. And seek limits is just a fancy word for, a fancy term for spanning the servo. So to seek limits, I hit the back button. I go to the next menu down under servos, and that's seek limits. I hit next, and we're gonna start with the gas valve, that's the default. I arrow down to where it says start, and press start. So when I press the enter key, that tells the BMU to start seeking limits on this servo. And what that means is it's gonna run the servo back and forth now, and it's watching the feedback potentiometer in the servo. And when the feedback potentiometer stops moving, it knows that it's at the motor in switch or travel limit switch for that servo, and it's gonna record that position. And it's gonna go back and forth a couple of times and make sure it has this right. Now, if this takes more than a couple of minutes, then it's possible that your servo is overdriving and it's hit the end of its range of motion before it hits the limit switch. And if that's the case, you're going to need to adjust the motor in switch on whichever direction you're overdriving, either the clockwise or counterclockwise direction. Okay, we know it was done right because now the crawler on the bottom of the LCD screen says servo 1 needs 0. And I'm going to repeat those exact 2 steps for servo 1 and servo 2. So if you think you got it, you can click out of this video. But because I have 2 more servos here, you get to see me do it 2 more times. So to do the next servo, I hit the back button. I go back to 0 calibration by pressing up. I hit next, So now I'm back in the zero calibration menu. I hit enter, and now I'm gonna, I hit enter to change the cursor to the input cursor, and now I hit the down arrow, and now I'm gonna do the FD fan damper. So I press enter, and go down one more, and where it says disabled, I'm gonna press enter, and the diamonds show up, and now Zero Servo is enabled on my FD fan damper. And that's servo address 1 in my training demo, or the middle servo here. So again, I push the clockwise and counterclockwise buttons, and just for fun, we're gonna say that this servo is closed in the counterclockwise direction. So I'm gonna run that servo all the way down until it stops moving. And again, in a nice quiet room, you can hear the servo, but in a noisy boiler room, I may have to just watch that little LCD display. So we're at position 0.0. We'll let it go around one more time. Position 0.0, so we're good. It's not a bad idea to bump it off of 0 just a little bit to get it away from the limit switch. And now counterclockwise is low fire for this servo. So I'm gonna hold the 0 button down, touch the counterclockwise button, and let go. And again, we know that it worked because the crawler on the bottom of the LCD display says servo 1 needs seek limits. So just like last time, we're gonna back out. We're gonna go down to seek limits, press next. We're on gas valve, so I wanna hit enter, hit the up arrow. Nope, better hit the down arrow. And then it says FD fan damper, so that's what I want. So I'm gonna hit enter. Now I'm gonna arrow the cursor down to the start button and press enter. And now the BMU will seek limits all on its own. Now, there is a faster way to do this. You can zero each servo individually, and then there's a function, I think at the bottom of the screen, that says seek limits on all servos. It'll save you a couple of minutes, but because I don't do this very often and I'm not a full-time technician, I don't want to confuse my salesperson brain. So I just follow the directions on the BMU LCD, and it's going to walk me through doing this. Okay, we know that it worked because the crawler says now that it's time to go on to servo 2. It says servo 2 needs 0. So I'm going to back out of this menu, go up to the 0 calibration menu again. And if you think you got this procedure, go ahead and X out of this and do it on your own. But I've got one more servo, so I'm going to do it one more time. So I'm on gas valve. I press enter to change the cursor. I hit down, and now I'm going to do the FGR damper. Press enter to confirm that. Down arrow to move the cursor over to disabled. Press the enter button. That changes disabled to enabled. And now we're on our FGR servo. That's the servo on the right for me. And this servo looks a little bit different. It's a 15 foot-pound servo with the older red board. So now I know that ServoCal is enabled on that servo because that little green light next to the 0 button is flashing. So again, I have control of my servo now with the clockwise and counterclockwise buttons. And just for fun, we're gonna make clockwise the low fire direction on our FGR damper. So I'm gonna run it all the way clockwise until it stops. It's a good idea to bump it off of the limit switch just a hair. And now, just like before, I'm gonna hold down the 0 button, push clockwise because that's my low fire direction, and let go of both buttons. And the BMU says servo 2 needs seek limits. So that means that this worked. So again, I go out a menu, I go into the seek limits menu. I selected the gas valve now. So I select to FGR damper, arrow down to start. And now the BMU is going to do this all on its own. Now, if you don't have the limit switches set up correctly, seek limits will take a lot longer and it may finish with an error. Go to the troubleshooting section of the manual and all the different error codes are alphabetized and it'll tell you what you're doing wrong. The most common thing is that your servo is overdriving before it hits that limit switch. And when that happens, the servo will kind of be bouncing against the end that it's allowed to travel by the valve or the damper or whatever, and the feedback will never get constant. So the BMU doesn't know what to do, and it'll say limits data bad or CC bad limits, bad data. And if that's the case, you know, pull that jumper 11, that puts the servo into manual, and then run the servo clockwise and counterclockwise and listen closely and make sure that you're hitting that end of travel limit switch before the servo actually can't move any farther. Also, these feedback pots have a forbidden zone. Consult the installation portion of the manual and it'll tell you where the forbidden zone is. And if you are using the part of the feedback pot in the forbidden zone, you'll get an error and it'll tell you entered clockwise or counterclockwise forbidden zone. And if that's the case, then unscrew the servo, rotate it 90 degrees to get it in the right direction, screw it back down again, reset your limit switches, and then go through zero and span again. Okay, this is where you want to get to. The screen now says no errors, and now we've successfully set up our 3 servos, and we're ready now to enter some fuel curve points and light off.